You've been there 34 years. Where are we at now in terms of honestly, a political environment at BYU as compared to when you first got there?
Well, where we are at is kind of predictable, I have to say, in the sense that the underlying causes or the structural features have long been there that lead to where we are, and that haven't been altered in any significant way. I would say that there has been an acceleration in certain changes at BYU, but it simply mirrors acceleration of changes that you mentioned that are buffeting, roiling our larger society, and BYU is far from immune to these things. It hasn't been immunized. It hasn't been. Hasn't taken care to resist the drift that is now accelerating. So if I cast about for an image of where we are, I think of a water park with a big slide that's kind of gentle at the beginning with an increasing slope, and the slope has been slippery all along, but now we're at an accelerating pace that is on the one hand kind of dizzying and in that way surprising, but structurally fairly predictable.
Okay. It seems to me that since then, little by little, academia has started to move more and more away from an American idealism of the civil rights, say, for example, of Martin Luther King, and much more over into the radical side of things. And it continues to grow. And when you don't have tolerance for the other side, which is what Marcuse really pushed for, you eliminate checks and balances within departments, within administration, et cetera. You can look at polls recently of the trend of those who are hired in all areas of university, faculty, going in administration, professors, et cetera. And it has moved very, very much to the left. And I think in academia to see something where there is a little bit of a leaning left. I think you want a little bit of openness for, searching ideas out, et cetera, in a classical liberal sense. But I believe the numbers that I saw recently, they were pushing 90% of those that are hired at universities with professors at universities are on the left, and over 20% of those in this, for example, the sociology departments were self-proclaimed Marxists. So where do we stand now in academia? If that's where academia is moving to, where it's going to be lockstep, that's how it looks to me right now. It's going to be lockstep in a certain ideology, in a leftist ideology, not a liberal ideology, a leftist ideology. How does BYU say we're in the world, but not of the world? We're in academia, but not of academia. And as that disparity grows between the mission of BYU and the mission of academia, how does BYU possibly navigate that?
A very short answer, and then let me back up and try to pick up on some of the very big themes. You ask hard questions, Greg. I had 10-minute answers to about a dozen things that you mentioned there, but let me see what I can pull together here. Because first, in answer to your question, you have named the challenge well, and it can only get worse. This process feeds off itself. Once you reach some critical mass, and what was it? Once you had 60, 70% of leftish domination in the academy, how would it not grow further still? The people hire people that they think are smart in the way that they are smart. And of course, this is what, if you told people in the 90% this statistic you just cited, they would say, well, Of course, we're the smart people. That's why we're on the left. This is what they think. Who do you think they're going to hire? Who are they going to promote? What kinds of publications and teachings are they going to reward? And so once you reach a critical mass, it goes in that direction. The momentum, it snowballs. What to do about it? Well, the first thing to say is like something. The first thing to say is, if you don't do something about it, what do you think is going to happen? That's the accelerating drift, or the increasing the acceleration down the slippery slope that I described earlier. So that, to paraphrase a well-known statement by a conservative publisher, public intellectual, what he said was, if any institution, thinking of universities or private foundations, think tanks, any institution that is not deliberately, intentionally conservative will be liberal, or will drift with the larger society. BYU is not exempt from this logic. So a short answer is, unless you have some definite approach and policy, and God forbid we should use the name conservative, in any way to represent the cultural tendencies with which we might be more sympathetic than other cultural tendencies. But unless you have a deliberate, incentivized policy to hire, promote, reward people who are not only in terms of an assent to the faith, more or less superficial or more or less profound, but unless you have a policy actually to seek out people who have deeply internalized a countercultural mission, and to retain and reward those people, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to follow the flow of the rest of the world, the way of all flesh. I was saying, we've had many fine speeches with which I wholeheartedly agree. They can tend to be a little bit vague and non-committal, but the fact is they connect in no way with the incentives on the ground. So the faculty assents to them with varying degrees of sincerity, no doubt, as in any human institution. And then they do what they do because they're getting paid to do what they've already been doing. And we've outsourced our hiring and promotion, in effect, to professional associations, publications, peer networks that are at best various in their proximity to BYU's mission.
I think that, and that's another concern, right? It's who's hiring, what are the filters there, what are the requirements, and I think obviously there's still, it's not run amok, so to speak, but it is concerning to think about how who are they targeting in terms of ideology, and because that's what I'm hearing, right? I'm hearing about the hiring practices right now. Of what's going on there and what people are looking for. And, and they use, from what I'm hearing, again, I'm just second hand here, but they're looking at things where they're saying, responses to certain people that are using traditional answers to questions and interviews and different things like that is, well, no, I don't think we can hire him because he's a misogynist. Right. Or simply because he believes in a traditional family. And so you have these responses where all of a sudden you're bringing in this identitarian ideology from the hard left of critical race theory and intersectionality and different things like that all of a sudden become the filters of how people are hired or promoted. I'm getting the same thing on promotions, being placed on committees and different things like this, getting full professorship. These are filters that I'm hearing about that are being put into place. I see this in the last several years, this acceleration of what you might call critical social justice, or what I usually will call postmodern critical theory of this hydra of a social justice ideology, where right now, anyway, the biggest head of all of that is, I think, critical race theory, but there's several heads to it. But my concern, my biggest concern, is that this ideology is going to continue to grow, and because it is growing, and that the kids that are going there are leaving a traditional home. When I say traditional, I mean a traditional LDS home where they're having family home evening. They're doing their scripture study. The kids have gone to their seminary, and they're active in the church. And then all of a sudden, as a freshman, and a couple of emails I got in their first week or two, they get there and they're taught something completely different. And I'm not saying this is completely, permeated everything there. That's not what I'm saying, but these are examples, at least, where they're all of a sudden being taught, no, the Family Proclamation is not necessarily doctrine. Fine. And maybe we don't need to look at this, but we need to look a little bit more at this ideology of social justice and intersectionality, because these are important things. And this is what you really need to pay attention to. That's a shock, I think, to a lot of kids who have left their nest and been taught something. And now all of a sudden, it's really easy to say, oh, well, my seminary teachers, and especially my parents, just don't know what they're talking about. Right? Because now I'm put into this new environment. I'm an adult, and this is the real world. And in the real world, this is the way it really is.
Well, Greg, I have to say, what would one expect if you're hiring professors off the shelf? I mean, off the professional shelf. What's on offer from Harvard or Stanford or Duke or Michigan or Michigan State? From the prestigious graduate programs in whatever discipline you're in. What do you expect if that's your main criterion? And how can you expect not to build up a critical mass of faculty whose worldviews, whose overlay of a certain secular, that's kind of a loaded, crude term, but let's leave it there for now, whose overlay of a certain secular worldview that is baked into the cake of our academic disciplines first tends to compete with and then to overcloud or overwhelm the intellectual positions that ought to be implicit in the gospel. What do you expect if that's who you're hiring off the shelf and then relying upon those people to hire the next generation? Because the hiring process is very fundamentally devolved onto departments that take all the initiative and for the most part receive a stamp of approval from colleges and the university. Now, let me say there's always been a filtering system. The Temple Recommend and Bishop's recommendation have been the anchors of that filtering system. And you can think about that. Are those adequate, or what could possibly go wrong if you're relying upon the possession of a Temple Recommend and the advice of a bishop to hire people to handle the integration of faith and intellect at the highest level? What could possibly go wrong? I do think actually there are many signs of things tightening up, of Salt Lake City shortening BYU's leash, which has been pretty long and loose in the past for reasons that are quite understandable and with which in some ways I sympathize. But nevertheless, there is a tightening up. You've probably read about the change of policy in the College of Religious Education having to do with hiring. And every department in college should be thinking, might this apply in some way to us, and what would that mean? And I'm not saying, by the way, that I in every way welcome or am optimistic about this ramping up of the ecclesiastical filter. I certainly understand the need for it, but things can go wrong in that direction too. There's really no substitute for leadership leadership at some decisive level that fully grasps the task of I was going to say preserving or moving forward with BYU's mission in the face of a cultural drift that is very definitely opposed to it. So for all the mission statements we read, if you don't read about the need to counter the cultural, ideological, spiritual, moral drift of the rest of society, we're not seriously engaging the problem. But consider what Elder Holland says. Consider President Kimball's second century address that I think President Holland quoted in 1988. And there you'll find some real clear instruction that this mission will not be fulfilled unless we deliberately not do what other universities are doing.
One thing that really stands out in the messaging to me from BYU is the proclamation on the family. And that seems to me, of all things, that seems to me to be the lightning rod. And because of this intersectionality, and it seems to be, when you break it all down, it's, do you believe in the traditional family or not? It doesn't mean that, you have to have a stay-at-home mom. You don't have to have, that's not what this is about. This is about gender. It's about marriage. It's about having kids. It's about supporting the family, a traditional family. Greg, is that where we're going to come to? Is that what it's going to come down to? Is this proclamation on the family?
That's the flashpoint. And yes, I think the proclamation on the family, its implications, its cultural, all the moral and cultural vision that it implies. How can it not come down to this? And sometimes critics of what shall I call it, moral and cultural conservatism will say, well, why this obsession with sexual morality and so forth? Well, excuse me. The left, especially since the 60s, but this has deep roots. You could trace this back to the Marxist appropriation of Nietzsche and Freud, which colors the whole 20th century. The left has been obsessed with sexual liberation, even to the exclusion of traditional leftist concern with material class issues of wealth and poverty and distribution and so forth. Those haven't gone away, but the spiritual, not in a good sense, core of the left since the 60s has been sexual liberation. We didn't make this the issue. Shall I call myself a conservative? I don't mind being called a conservative. If conservative means standing by the broad vision of the human being and the nature of human existence that is implicit in the proclamation on the family. So that will be a touchstone, and that really is a Solzhenitsyn speaks, as you know, of a line between good and evil going through the heart of every individual. That's relevant to the ideological concerns we share. But you could say that right through our society and through the heart of every citizen and Latter-day Saint is driven this question: befriend the traditional family, and I know a lot goes into refining that definition of what that can mean, befriending the traditional family and the sexual morality pertaining to it, or throwing in with the cause of boundless liberation from the traditional family. We're not making it up when we say that that's what's at stake. And what makes an intellectual leftish I would say, is more fundamentally than anything a hostility to the principles of the Declaration, the Proclamation on the Family. And that hostility, only God can search hearts. I don't know what's in the heart of all faculty members at BYU. You have all gradations of sympathy or antipathy to the proclamation. But I think that the tipping point is, do you really embrace it, and are you willing to defend it by faith and by reason? Or do you find it vaguely an embarrassment or something that maybe we can get beyond, or we wouldn't want to focus on because that would be disreputable from an academic point of view, et cetera? That's really the dividing line. And I think we have crossed a tipping point in terms of I don't know what the numbers are. And it's not really the raw numbers that matter if we knew them in terms of where the majority of faculty stand. What matters is what activist groups have confidence, have a kind of see themselves as occupying a moral high ground and are conceded that moral high ground by others. And I think we've gone past that tipping point, and it won't be easy. It won't be pretty to tip back the other way.